Hello and welcome to the very last day of November, or if you're watching this like any time other than immediately when I posted this, December or later. Hello. But it's still November here, at least for like a few more hours, and that means it's still nonfiction November. I had the joy of being tagged in a nonfiction tag. Thank you, David. I've linked the video down below, so I get to do a tag. That's so exciting. It's really exciting as a, small YouTube channel. So thank you again. Let's go. Let's talk about nonfiction. What was my first experience reading nonfiction? The first one that I can remember properly was reading the book Stiff, The Secret Life of Cadavers. One thing that may seem on brand for me was as a teenager, when I was like 16, 17, I became really obsessed with HBO's Six Feet Under. Like, I have seen the whole series 4 or 5 times. I used, this is 2010, I used my iTunes money to buy the individual episodes and seasons and watch them on my 1-inch screen of the iPod Classic when I should have been sleeping. Before bed, I would watch full 1-hour episodes of this HBO show. So I became very interested in morbid things, as teenage girls do. I became interested in undertaking and the lives of cadavers. So I remember I started that book at the time, and then I didn't pick it up until several years later when I was in graduate studies and had the experience of working with portions of human cadavers. And just in general, I got very interested in this. That kind of morbid side is something that really comes out in my nonfiction taste. I love dark history. I love um, like true crime and weird science and just people doing slightly terrible things or slightly bizarre things. Yeah, so if you don't know anything about this book, I do really recommend it. It talks about how we use corpses as crash test dummies when testing cars. It talks about um, body farms, so like these places in the States where basically donated bodies are put in different situations of decomposition, and that's how you know that a body that's been 6 days in a bog looks like this versus a body that's been 6 days in a dumpster looks like that. Someone needs to do these studies. And if you're interested in what happens to human corpses, that's this book. We're starting off the stag real strong. Has reading a work of nonfiction ever brought me to tears? I don't think I've ever actually overtly sobbed from a book. This is not because I don't have emotions. I mean, yes. I am actually a walking bundle of emotions. I have constant emotions, and therefore I don't automatically kind of open the floodgates. I will internally sob. I've definitely internally sobbed at a lot of nonfiction. But my emotional affects aside, some of the saddest nonfiction that I've read, I'm trying to think. I'm gonna go look at my Goodreads nonfiction tag. Give me a sec. My books, my nonfiction, 121. Wow. Okay, so I just scrolled through my nonfiction tag, and for one thing, I have 121 nonfiction books in my Goodreads, like, nonfiction tag, and I have read most of them. I don't consider myself a nonfiction reader. I'm, like, occasionally dabbling. I'd say some of the sad ones that really moved me that I'm looking at here include Gabor Mate's In the Realm of the Hungry Ghost, Close Encounters with Addiction. Gabor Mate is a psychiatrist, doctor working out of BC, and he works a lot with people who deal with chronic addiction, have a strong history of trauma, and he talks about how social and world factors influence that. In the Realm of the Hungry Ghost was the first book of his that I read, and I think some of the personal stories are extremely harrowing. Like, they definitely made me, they were emotionally intense. I've also read a couple of accounts of concentration camp survivors, including Elie Wiesel's Night, which was very intense. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning was also a book that meant a lot to me. I've read a lot of mental health nonfiction too. Like, I'm thinking The Original Girl Interrupted. I recently read Prozac Nation, which definitely hit some sad parts. Crying in H Mart was crying inside my heart. Sometimes I try to make a pun when I'm talking about sad things because, it dissolves the emotion or whatnot. there's a lot here. I'm looking at my nonfiction, I'm like, am I okay? I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings by Maya Angelou really, really moved me. I barely remember the book. I really just remember the emotions, and they were intense emotions. There's a whole lot more, but let's see if I can address some of the other questions using those titles. I think just the trouble I'm having with this question is like, I'm not a crier and I read about sad stuff a lot. So it kind of, yeah, it's a little difficult to answer. Let's move on. Are there any people who've played a significant role in my nonfiction journey? Not that I can think of off the top of my head, and that doesn't feel like a very satisfying answer. Um, I can think of someone who got me into science writing because I was trained as a scientist. I didn't read science for fun. But then I listened to how Ed Yong writes and reads about science. And just, I studied the microbiome, like the human microbiome, and Ed Yong wrote a book about the microbiome. And I was like, I'm not going to read that. It's like for the layperson, I'm reading the papers and such. And I don't want to think about work while I'm doing like my reading for fun. But I Contain Multitudes by Ed Yong is actually amazing, and I enjoyed it even though it was like work. I mean, that's the other joys of being trained as a researcher is you do get to work with things that you find cool. So at the end of the day, I did find it really cool. And I think getting into that and reading some of Ed Yong's other work on animal senses and the neuroscience of that, all of that kind of allowed me to bridge that hesitation of staying away from science writing and staying away from science as fun because I didn't want to like merge fun and work. I currently do have the benefit of not actively working as a scientist right now. I don't know what will happen in the future, we'll see. But because I don't actively work as a scientist right now, I'm a lot more comfortable reading a lot more science writing. But Ed Yong was the person who first got me into that. Because otherwise, my nonfiction is largely, I'd say, autobiographies and social political issues. So it was a big switch to finally start reading nature writing. Yes, I do enjoy documentaries. I generally have just like not been a big TV watcher lately, but I used to very much just like see whatever free documentaries I could find on YouTube, largely true crime ones. I've seen way too many. I've seen way too many like random true crime ones or random social ones. All the weird late night documentaries that were done about like cults, like I have seen those. In terms of do I have a favorite, is there's a subject I'd like to see discussed on film? I honestly just don't watch a lot of stuff anymore, so I'm not the right person to answer this question. I remember being very shocked though by The Social Dilemma, which was a Netflix documentary put out 2, 3 years ago about um, the data tracking and the addictive nature of cell phones. It's not necessarily the most informative documentary. I've found a lot more information on the topic from other nonfiction books that I've recently sought out, but it definitely like kindled my interest. Yeah, it really kindled my interest in the dangers of social media and the toxicity of social media beyond things like self-perception and comparison, but more into things of like data harvesting and turning us into like attention slaves, like the attention economy and things like that, which I am actively contributing to by virtue of being a content creator. We're all trapped in the machine, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, I enjoy documentaries. Have you ever read a biography about or memoir of a person with whom you identify? Several. So I got really into reading a lot of these like mental health memoirs. The first one that comes to mind when I read this question is Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal by Jeanette Winterson. In my early 20s, I read most of Jeanette Winterson's canon, including her most famous book, Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, which is semi-autobiographical, and then the true autobiography of that is Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal. And she is a writer who grew up in a very religious community and who grew up gay, and she like needed to really reconcile that and reconcile not necessarily feeling wanted by her adoptive family And some of those tensions are things that I've either observed or seen or experienced. I don't want to go into too many details because that feels a little personal. We don't know each other yet on that level. But I did really, really like her books. Otherwise, I've enjoyed some other mental health memoirs, like The Original Girl Interrupted by Suzanne Keyes, as well as I wouldn't even say that the book is good, but it was worth reading because dialectic behavioral therapy has helped me so much. I really enjoyed Marsha Lineham's memoir, Building a Life Worth Living, because she is someone who suffered from a variety of mental illnesses when she was younger and then became a clinician and developed dialectic behavioral therapy to help people who struggle with emotional regulation, emotional intensity, to help them regulate that and develop emotional skills that allowed them to live as competent adults. And that's something that's personally helped me a lot. So reading her autobiography was also just like very, very. I think this is the thing with nonfiction is my nonfiction is very personal, so I don't necessarily talk about it. This is quite a vulnerable tag, but I like it. I like it very much. Educated by Tara Westover also come to mind when answering this tag, as does The Complete Persepolis by Marianne Satrapi, as well as Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. I find it really interesting when an autobiography is also written in like as a graphic novel. I find that adds so much more intimacy because it's written with such like, I don't know, you get the personality of the writer as a writer and as an illustrator, and that's like pretty beautiful and cool. One that I'm really excited to read, really looking forward to, that I think I will relate to. I know this wasn't a question, but it just came up on my little list here. Is The Tiger in the Cage, a memoir of a body in crisis, and it's a woman talking about her chronic pain. And I've experienced a lot of chronic pain over the past few years, but especially in the past 6 months. And I'm just, I need, I need someone to go through that with. And one graphic novel I can't forget, well, a series of graphic novel is everything Ali Brosh has done. So, Hyperbole and a Half and Solutions and Other Problems. I'm really bad at answering tags with just one book. I don't do that. I don't do that. It needs to be a kaleidoscope. Read aloud a short passage you love from a work of nonfiction. This I will just limit myself to one because this has been a guiding principle of mine ever since I read about this and thought about this idea. So, one of the greatest books that I read in 2023, one of the greatest nonfiction books and books in general, is Johann Hari's Stolen Focus: Why You Can't Pay Attention and How to Think Deeply Again. And it's exactly that. It's a book very topical for our time, came out very recently. And he says something really beautiful about reading books and why the medium is the message, for lack of a better word. Marshall McLuhan there. And he talks about why reading books in and of itself is like a deep thinking experience, and not in like a pretentious way, but just in a way that it's one of those experiences where you do have to focus. It's an experience that induces a state of flow. And I'm just going to read it. I'm just going to read it now. What, I wondered, is the message buried in the medium of the printed book? Before the words convey their specific meaning, the medium of the book tells us several things. Firstly, life is complex, and if you want to understand it, you have to set aside a fair bit of time to think deeply about it. You need to slow down. Secondly, there is a value in leaving behind your other concerns and narrowing down your attention to one thing, sentence after sentence, page after page. Thirdly, it is worth thinking deeply about how other people live and how their minds work. They have complex inner lives just like you. I love that quote. I love that quote so much. I'm not going to talk about it too much. It's just a great quote. I think it's really beautiful, and it's a really beautiful ode to books. Do any works of nonfiction intimidate you? Which ones and why? It's not that they intimidate me per se, but there are just some topics that I will be interested, let's say, to discuss, but I won't want to read about them. Or like the book is not the medium for me to think about them. One of those topics is philosophy. I don't really engage with primary philosophical texts. I just genuinely just struggle with staying interested, which is unfortunate. I don't know what that says about anything, but it's just not my cup of tea. And I feel the same way about like pure history. I need it to be, if I'm reading something historical, it needs to be dark history because I need that morbid appeal. But just reading like the basic history of something is not, no matter how interesting it is, I feel like I have trouble engaging with it if I know that it's nonfiction, which is a little strange. Like I said, I don't think of myself as a nonfiction reader. I'm primarily a fiction reader, and then now and again I'll dabble into nonfic. So, again, it's not about intimidation. It's just there's things that I don't like, and that's fine, right? That's fine. So, to anyone who is hesitant to read nonfiction, I'm not the right person to ask because I don't read a lot of nonfiction. I really just read nonfiction on topics that I was inherently interested in. Maybe read some articles about, maybe heard some podcasts about, and was like, no, I need to know even more. And then I delved into the nonfiction. I did, however, find that getting more nonfiction into my life was made easier by audiobooks. And never want to get into the debate of whether audiobooks count as reading. Because I will say this, if you listen to podcasts, if you are someone who likes to listen to podcasts about any sort of nonfiction topic, any informative podcast, congratulations, you can listen to a nonfiction audiobook. And that was my gateway for me. Was basically going from listening to true crime podcasts to listening to true crime books, to then listening to science books, to now just listening to a bunch of different nonfiction books. And you basically just do that in any situation where you'd be listening to a podcast. At the gym, on a walk, doing chores, crafting, whatever. I can count. Literally whatever topic you're interested in, there's books about it. Probably nonfiction books about it. Don't write it off as a whole genre. Like, it feels almost strange to think of nonfiction as a whole genre because it's so many genres. It is different from fiction just in the sense that it explores ideas in a different way. It explores ideas grounded in reality rather than grounded in a story. But I find that the ideas I enjoy in fiction are also the ideas that I enjoy exploring in nonfiction. What are my favorite works of nonfiction? Okay, the one that always comes to mind, like if anyone asks me for a nonfiction recommendation, is The Duo of Humankind and Utopia for Realists by Rutger Bregman. Rutger Bregman is an economist who writes about how actually, like, most human beings are, like, not terrible people, largely. He argues this very radical idea in Humankind and debunks some of the popular myths or examples that are used to illustrate why we're all inherently evil. And I don't consider myself that much of an optimist, but I really like this dose of hefty optimism. It makes the world better, a little bit better, and it really helps buffer against a lot of catastrophizing. And similarly, Utopia for Realists, he also talks about, okay, well, like, provided this kind of evidence and provided some of the things we know that humanity's done and humanity's capable of, how can we build a nicer society? And the book is really just a manifesto in favor of universal basic income. And if that's at all something you're interested in, I highly recommend it. I think it's very well researched and it explores the idea from several angles in a way that's really fascinating. So I'm just scrolling through looking at my 5-star nonfiction books to see what I missed. One that I recommend, which is a little bit of a strange recommendation because I do still eat meat. I am currently an omnivore, but I really enjoy Jonathan Safran Foer's Eating Animals, as well as We Are the Weather, that are both books about climate and factory farming and the ethical considerations behind reducing meat consumption or he's for eliminating meat consumption. I think it's really eye-opening and adds a lot of interesting facts to the conversation. And that's something that I don't particularly feel strongly about, but know people who feel very strongly about it. And it's definitely allowed me to be better versed and make more conscious choices. Please don't come for me, I'm severely anemic. Otherwise, I really enjoyed Judith Herman's Trauma and Recovery, which is one of the kind of first books written about trauma. and the idea of complex PTSD. I also really enjoyed Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score. I've mentioned Gabor Mate already, and then I also really liked What My Bones Know by Stephanie Fu, which was a memoir of healing from complex trauma. When it comes to nature writing, let's get a little lighter. I really liked Merlin Sheldrake's Entangled Life. I recommend it to anyone who's like, mushrooms are cool. I'm like, yeah, mushrooms are really cool. Read this guy's book. It's really good. Um, I also recently read Braiding Sweetgrass, and like, it is so worth the hype. That was amazing. Um, as I mentioned, Ed Yong's books. Geez, I'm just scrolling through these, and I'm like, I don't think of myself as a nonfiction reader, but there's several nonfiction books that I really like. Surprise, surprise, I guess. I honestly did not prepare for this portion of the assignment, but I will do that very shortly and include some lovely people in the description comment section. And yeah, if you get a chance to do this tag, I know November's over now, but it's a fun tag. It made me reflect about the kind of nonfiction that I read and being a primarily fiction reader, but pretending that I don't like nonfiction, but it's not true. I do like nonfiction. Um, that's a lot of filming. That's a lot of talking for today. We'll leave it at that. All right. I hope you read some great books, maybe some great nonfiction ones. If you have interesting answers to this tag or any other fun way you want to engage with me for the algorithm, please do so. I love it. I love reading your comments. Sometimes I don't get back to you for like a week because I try to live an online offline life balance. It's like a work-life balance, but you know what I mean. Um, but they do warm my heart every time, and I always sincerely look forward to your comments. So thank you for that. Okay. I hope you read a good book soon. I'm gonna go. All right, bye.